My name is Lena Mercer. I'm 24 years old now, but this really started when I was 14, back when I still believed that if I worked hard enough, behaved well enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe my family would eventually love me the same way they loved my older sister. They never did. My sister, Emma Mercer, was 17 at the time. Now she's 27. And in my family, Emma had always been less of a daughter and more of a religion. My mother worshipped her moods. My father adjusted the temperature of the whole house around her comfort. If Emma laughed, everyone relaxed. If Emma cried, the walls themselves seemed to tighten. If Emma wanted something, the conversation was never whether she should have it. It was only how quickly the rest of us could rearrange our lives to make sure she did. I was the opposite. I was the child who learned early how to read the room before speaking. The child who got praise for being easy because I didn't ask for much. The child who quietly understood that being low maintenance was the closest thing to being loved that I was ever going to get. So when Emma announced she was pregnant by her boyfriend Tyler Nash, you would think that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally draw a line. She was 17. He was 19. He had no stable job, no real plans, no visible sense of shame, and the kind of confidence that only grows in men who have never once been forced to suffer the full consequences of their own stupidity. But no, my mother cried. Actually cried. She wrapped Emma in her arms at the dinner table like Emma had just cured a disease instead of detonating her own future. "Oh my God," Mom said, voice shaking with emotion. "I'm going to be a grandmother." She said it like she'd been handed a crown. Emma gave this tiny, smug little smile over Mom's shoulder. Not embarrassed, not frightened, not overwhelmed. Victorious. My father just stared at his plate, fork paused halfway to his mouth, shoulders slumped in that familiar way they always did when Mom took over the room. That was my father's specialty. Silence. He could communicate entire paragraphs through silence, regret, disagreement, exhaustion, weakness. He packed them all into that mute, defeated stillness and then called it peace. I sat there at the table with my pulse banging in my ears, thinking, are they serious? Because I knew, with the brutal clarity only younger siblings develop, that if I had come home at 14 with a disaster of my own, my parents would have treated me like a criminal. They would have called me irresponsible, selfish, reckless, ungrateful. They would have locked my life down so hard I would have needed permission to breathe. But Emma got tears, hugs, and blessings. That pretty much explains my childhood. A few months before the pregnancy announcement, I'd gotten a C in math and lost my phone privileges for 3 weeks. The year before that, Emma failed 2 classes, and my mother bought her a brand new phone because, according to her, Emma has just been under so much emotional pressure lately. I still remember standing in the kitchen that day holding my report card, staring at Emma's new case, glossy pale pink with gold trim, while my own punishment was still sitting like acid in my chest. That was our family in one image. Emma made mistakes and received comfort. I made mistakes and received correction. Sometimes punishment, sometimes humiliation. And Tyler, God, Tyler, he was exactly the kind of man who mistakes laziness for rebellion and bad manners for personality. He had been fired from so many jobs, my mother had started describing them as bad fits, as though the issue was workplace chemistry and not the fact that he had the discipline of a wet paper towel. Last Christmas, he showed up with a gift for Emma that still had the security tag attached. We all saw it. No one said anything. Mom just smiled and called him thoughtful. He wore this ugly neck tattoo that said no regrets, which felt almost poetic considering his life seemed to be one long, public demonstration of why regret exists. He drove a dented Honda that coughed smoke into our street every time it pulled up. He never knocked. He just walked in, raided our refrigerator, and dropped onto our furniture like the house belonged to him. The first time he came for dinner, maybe 3 months before Emma announced the pregnancy, he spent 20 minutes talking about how college was a scam because real entrepreneurs build their own path. At the time, he was working part-time at a car wash, living in his mother's basement, borrowing gas money from Emma. But my parents nodded along like he was delivering a TED Talk. Dad gave me one quick look from across the table, a tired, flat little glance that said, "You hearing this too?" But of course he didn't say anything. He never did. I tried warning my mother once. I'd overheard Tyler talking in our backyard, pacing by the fence with his phone pressed to his ear, bragging to someone about how he'd been kicked out of his ex-girlfriend's place after borrowing her dad's credit card. Borrowing. That was the word he used. I told Mom that night while she was rinsing dishes. She barely paused. "People deserve second chances, Lena," she said. "Tyler's had a hard time." A hard time. as if his entire personality was just a temporary weather pattern that would clear up on its own. When you grow up as the less favored child, one of the cruelest things isn't just the unfairness. It's the confusion. Because for years, you don't know whether the problem is them or you. You start wondering if maybe you're too sensitive, too quiet, too plain, too difficult in invisible ways. Maybe if you were prettier. Maybe if you smiled more. Maybe if you were louder, softer, smarter, funnier, easier to show off. Maybe then they would look at you the way they looked at her. I tried. I got good grades. I kept my room clean. I joined clubs I didn't even care about because I thought maybe a certificate on the fridge would buy me one decent conversation. It never worked. Emma could have burned the house down, and Mom would have blamed faulty wiring. There was this one night when I was 12 and Emma was 15. We both had events. I had a science fair. She had a chorus concert. Guess where my parents went? Emma sang maybe one line in the middle of a group number while I stood beside my renewable energy project alone in a gym full of parents asking thoughtful questions and taking photos. My teacher kept glancing toward the door. "Are your parents on their way?" she asked gently. "Traffic," I lied. I won second place. I still remember holding that ribbon on the ride home with my thumb pressed into the crease until it bent. No one ever asked how I did. No one noticed the ribbon on my desk for weeks. And then, about a week after the pregnancy announcement, my mother called what she described as a family meeting. In our house, those words had never once led to anything good for me. Emma came in 20 minutes late, one hand on her lower back, wearing the expression of someone who thought carrying a pregnancy should qualify her for sainthood. Mom rushed to get her a pillow. Dad was already seated on the big couch. Mom took her place beside him. Emma stretched out dramatically on the love seat. And me? I got the hard wooden dining chair dragged into the corner. Even our seating arrangements told the truth. Mom folded her hands and said, "With the baby coming, we need to think practically." That sentence changed my life. She started talking about space, support, stability, what Emma needed, what the baby needed, how important it was that Emma had help nearby, how stressful young motherhood could be, how families came together in moments like this. I remember waiting, actually waiting, for the point where any of this involved me in a way that wasn't terrifying. Then Mom said it. They were sending me to Florida to live with my grandparents, so Emma could turn my room into a nursery. The words did not land all at once. They arrived in pieces. Florida, grandparents, your room, nursery, temporary, support system. It felt like being buried under soft things. Pillows, blankets, polite voices. Every word was presented like something reasonable, loving even, but underneath it was the same reality. I was being removed. Exiled from my own home because my sister had gotten pregnant and needed better sunlight. "It's only for a while," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Emma needs us right now." I looked at Dad. That was instinct. Stupid instinct. The part of me that still believed maybe he would finally choose a side if the cruelty became obvious enough. He rubbed one hand over his mouth and muttered, "It might be good for you to spend time with Grandma and Grandpa. They've got that nice pool." A pool. I can still remember the shape of that sentence, like he was offering a vacation brochure in place of a spine. Emma actually laughed. "You should be grateful," she said. "At least you won't have to deal with midnight feedings and diaper smell." Then, with a little shrug, she added, "And honestly, your room gets better light. It'll be nicer for the baby." There are moments in your life when something inside you doesn't break loudly. It just quietly rearranges itself around a new truth. That was mine. I wasn't family in the same way Emma was family. I was logistics. I was movable. Storage. A problem to solve. "When exactly am I supposed to leave?" I asked. My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for letting them hear it. Mom pulled out her phone and checked her calendar. "Your grandparents said any time," she said, "but we thought after the school year ends would make the most sense. That gives you about 6 weeks." 6 weeks. 6 weeks to say goodbye to my friends, my school, my routines, my town, the comic shop I went to on Saturdays, the park where I skateboarded badly but was getting better, the few corners of my life that actually felt like mine. "Do I get any say in this?" I asked. Mom gave me that fake soft voice she used when she wanted credit for kindness she had not earned. "Sometimes families have to make hard decisions, Lena. This is what's best for everyone." "Everyone except me," I said. Emma rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic. It's Florida, not prison. There are beaches." Nobody laughed. But nobody defended me either. And then the meeting kept going. That was the worst part. Not just the decision, the casualness after. Mom started talking about repainting my room a softer color. She was already thinking aloud about where the crib would go, whether the dresser should be moved, which of my posters would need to come down. I sat there while they discussed the demolition of my life like I was not even present. "What about school?" I said. "My friends? Soccer tryouts?" "You'll make new friends," Mom replied. "Florida schools might even be better," Emma said, texting someone while she said it, like my future was boring even as she helped destroy it. I looked at Dad again. Still nothing. Just that same tired face. That same silence. That same choice. When the meeting finally ended, Emma stood carefully, one hand under her stomach, and said, "Can we be done? Tyler's taking me to dinner." Then she walked away. I stayed in the chair a few extra seconds because standing up felt like agreeing that the conversation had been real. Then I went to my room, still mine for a few more weeks, and locked the door. I cried that night harder than I had in years. Not loud crying. Not movie crying. The kind that feels like your ribs are trying to fold inward around something hot and unbearable. The kind where you press your fist against your mouth because you know no one is coming, and somehow that makes the sound feel embarrassing. No one knocked. No one checked on me. No one changed their mind. And that was the beginning. Not of my freedom. Not yet. First came the humiliation. First came the erasure. First came the long 6 weeks, where my family began clearing me out of my own life while I was still living inside it. The weeks after that family meeting felt less like waiting to move and more like attending my own slow disappearance. Once the decision had been made, my mother and Emma moved through the house with this frightening kind of cheerful momentum, as if the hardest part was behind us now that no one had to bother pretending I mattered. The conversation was over. The sacrifice had been selected. All that remained was execution. At first, it was subtle. A package of baby clothes arrived and got set on the kitchen table. A pamphlet about cribs appeared on the counter. My mother began leaving paint swatches in the hallway. Pastel yellows, muted creams, soft greens, colors that had nothing to do with me, as if she needed the walls to start forgetting I had ever touched them. Then it stopped being subtle. One afternoon, I came home from school and found Emma standing in my doorway with her arms folded while Mom held up a little mobile with clouds and stars on it. "What do you think?" Mom asked Emma, like they were shopping in a boutique instead of standing in the middle of my room. Emma tilted her head. "Maybe over there," she said, pointing toward the corner near my bookshelf. "The crib could go here, and then the changing table where Lena's desk is." I stood there with my backpack sliding off one shoulder, staring at them. They both turned. Mom gave a tiny jump, hand to her chest, like I was the one who had intruded. "Oh," she said, "you're home early." It was 4:15. I came home at 4:15 every weekday. "That's my desk," I said. Emma sighed like I was being exhausting. "Not for long." "I wish I could tell you," I yelled, that I smashed the mobile on the floor or screamed until the neighbors heard or finally made enough noise to shame somebody into acting human. But that's not really how kids like me break. When you've spent years learning that your pain is inconvenient, your first instinct isn't explosion. It's containment. So I just stood there, looking at the two of them, mentally redecorating my life while I was still inside it, and said very quietly, "Could you at least wait until I'm gone?" My mother set the mobile down and gave me that pinched expression she used whenever I refused to play along with my own mistreatment. "We're on a timeline, Lena. A timeline." As if my grief was just a scheduling issue. After that, the house turned into enemy territory. Emma started dropping baby things into my room like territory markers. A bag of tiny pink socks on my chair, a folded blanket on the bed, a stack of parenting books on my desk. I would move them, and a few hours later more would appear. It was like she was testing how much space she could claim before I stopped resisting. Tyler came around even more too, which made everything worse. He already carried himself like a man with no boundaries, but now he had purpose. He swaggered through our house with one hand tucked into his hoodie pocket and the other rubbing absent circles over Emma's stomach like that single gesture transformed him into a father instead of what he actually was, an overgrown boy who liked being congratulated for damage. He'd sit in the kitchen and eat leftovers without asking, leave soda cans in the living room, use our bathroom like a gas station stop. He started parking in my father's spot in the driveway, which somehow felt symbolic enough to make my skin crawl. One day I came home and found him wearing my favorite hoodie, my Black Bulls hoodie, the one I'd saved birthday money for. He was leaning against the counter eating cereal straight from the box, my sleeves bunched awkwardly over his wrists. I stopped cold. "Why are you wearing that?" He looked down at himself, then shrugged. "It was in the laundry room." "That's mine." He took another bite and smirked. "Relax, little lady. You won't need warm clothes in Florida. Something inside me flashed so hot I actually took a step toward him. Take it off. My mother was standing at the sink. She turned around at the sound of my voice and immediately frowned. Not at him, at me. Lena, don't start. Don't start, I repeated. He's wearing my clothes. Tyler lifted one shoulder, doing that fake amused grin he always wore when he knew he was getting away with something. I'll give it back. But he said it in the tone people use when they have absolutely no intention of doing what they just promised. Now, I said. Mom dried her hands and came toward us, irritation tightening her face. This is exactly the kind of selfishness I'm talking about. Emma is under enough stress already without you picking fights over a sweatshirt. A sweatshirt. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or maybe just shut everything out long enough not to feel what was happening. Because that was the trick in our house. Nothing that hurt me was ever allowed to count as serious. If it happened to Emma, it became a crisis. If it happened to me, it became overreaction. Tyler gave me a smug little glance over Mom's shoulder. I never got that hoodie back. Maybe he lost it. Maybe he sold it. Maybe it ended up on the floor of his car under fast food wrappers and cigarette ash. The specific ending almost didn't matter. It was just one more thing taken from me while everyone watched and called it normal. The erasing became physical after that. My mother started boxing up my books before I had packed anything else. I came home one day to find my bookshelf empty, cardboard boxes lined in the hallway, my paperbacks stacked crookedly inside them like they were headed for storage after an estate sale. For a second, I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. Those books had been mine in a way almost nothing else in that house was mine. I'd bought them one by one at used bookstores, library sales, thrift bins, garage sales, fantasy novels, graphic novels, science books, stories with worlds bigger and kinder than my own. Some of them had little notes in the margins, thoughts I'd scribbled during late nights under a lamp, private things no one had ever asked to know. I turned and found Mom in the hallway carrying a roll of bubble wrap. What happened? She blinked. We need the shelf. For what? For the baby's things. The answer came so easily, as if that explained everything. I looked back at the boxes. You packed my books? Well, you weren't taking all of them to Florida, were you? She said. We'll store them in the attic. The attic. Hot, dusty, damp in summer. Cardboard softening at the edges. Pages curling. Stories swelling and rotting in the dark. Those are mine. And we are storing them safely, she snapped, suddenly defensive. Honestly, Lena, do you have to make every single thing harder? I stared at her. That question stayed with me for years. Because she really believed it. She believed my pain was inconvenience. My attachment was obstruction. My existence inside the machinery of Emma's happiness was a complication to be managed. That night, I sat on the floor and opened one of the boxes after everyone went to bed, just to touch the books and make sure they were still there. It sounds ridiculous now, maybe, but when your life is being dismantled room by room, object by object, sometimes touching what remains, is the only way to reassure yourself that you haven't disappeared completely. I tried talking to my friends about what was happening. Most of them didn't understand. To 14-year-olds, Florida sounded like a postcard. Beaches, pools, palm trees, freedom, new start. They saw distance without context and assumed adventure. Dude, that sounds amazing, one of the boys in my English class said. You'll probably see alligators and stuff. I smiled the way people smile when they don't have the energy to explain trauma. My best friend, Alex Ramirez, was the only one who really got it. We were sitting on the cracked concrete wall behind the school gym after class, backpacks at our feet, heat rising off the pavement in waves. They can't just send you away because your sister got pregnant, she said. That's insane. I looked down. Apparently they can. No, Alex said, sharper this time. I mean, maybe they are, but that doesn't make it normal. There's a very specific kind of relief that comes from being believed. Not comfort exactly, more like oxygen, a loosening in the chest. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to say it out loud until she did. That what was happening to me was wrong. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Wrong. But validation and rescue aren't the same thing. Alex couldn't stop it, neither could I. I did try. One night I found Dad in the garage organizing tools he wasn't actually using. That had become his ritual when life in the house got too tense. Go stand among metal objects and pretend there was a practical problem nearby he could solve. The garage smelled like oil and cut grass, and the faint, stale bitterness of old sawdust. A radio played low from the workbench. He was sorting screws into little plastic bins, shoulders bent. Dad. He glanced up. Hey. I stood there for a second, not sure how to begin. There's something humiliating about begging the weaker parent to finally act like the stronger one. This isn't fair, I said. Why do I have to leave? He exhaled through his nose and set down the screwdriver in his hand. We've been over this. No, I said. Mom's been over it. Emma's been over it. I haven't. Why can't Emma and Tyler get their own place? The silence after that was so long, the radio announcer changed segments. Dad leaned both hands on the workbench and looked down. Sometimes families have to make sacrifices. I hated that sentence on sight. It always meant someone had already decided whose pain counted least. But why is it always me? I asked. My voice was shaking now. I hated that too. Hated how tears made adults think they were winning. What do you think? He was quiet a long time. Then he said, almost too softly to hear, what I think doesn't seem to matter much around here. That answer changed something in me. Because until then, a part of me had still imagined Dad as trapped, but good. Quiet, but decent. Someone who disagreed in private and maybe suffered because he couldn't do more. But hearing him say that, he knew. He knew this was wrong, and he had decided that knowing was enough. I looked at him and saw not a victim, but a warning. A person who had surrendered so completely to peacekeeping that he had mistaken it for innocence. And I think, for the first time, I was truly afraid of becoming like him. I made one last attempt to stay. I went to my school guidance counselor. I remember sitting in that office trying so hard to sound calm while my insides felt like they were collapsing. I explained that my sister was pregnant, my room was being turned into a nursery, and my parents were sending me to live in another state even though I didn't want to go. The counselor's expression changed immediately. Concern. Real concern. It was almost enough to make me cry. She called my parents in for a meeting. For a day and a half, I let myself hope. Maybe if another adult heard it out loud, the whole arrangement would finally sound as grotesque as it felt. Maybe someone official would say this was emotionally reckless. Maybe someone would ask whether I had any rights at all. Instead, my mother arrived in a cream blouse and her best church lady voice. She talked about family support, about a beautiful opportunity for me to bond with my grandparents, about sunshine and stability, and how blessed we were to have extended family willing to help. She framed it like a mutual decision. A loving one, almost generous. Dad sat beside her nodding. The counselor bought every word. By the time the meeting ended, I felt more alone than I had before it started. As we walked to the parking lot, Mom kept smiling until the office door shut behind us. Then her fingers closed around my shoulder. Hard. Not enough to leave a mark, just enough to make the message physical. Don't you ever try to embarrass this family again, she whispered. I said nothing. What was there left to say? The final thing, the moment that burned the last illusion out of me, happened by accident. I was walking past Emma's room one night when I heard her laughing on the phone. Her door was cracked open. Yeah, it's perfect, she said. The brat's getting shipped off, so the baby gets a whole nursery. Mom already promised she'll help with night feeding, so I'll still be able to go out sometimes. She laughed again, a bright, careless sound. I stood in the hallway with my hands slowly curling into fists. There it was. No softness, no guilt, no complicated emotional conflict. Just relief. I wasn't her little sister whose life was being uprooted. I was clutter. An obstacle. A brat in the way of her setup. That word, setup, haunted me. Because it was true. This whole thing wasn't an emergency solution. It was optimization. They were redesigning the house, and I no longer fit the floor plan. The day before I left, I went to the woods behind our neighborhood to see my old treehouse. Dad and I had built it when I was 7. One of the only times in my childhood that felt uncomplicated. He'd let me hammer in nails crookedly and measure boards badly and still acted like we were building a castle. For years it had been my place, my hiding spot. The one thing in my world that felt like it belonged to me without condition. I hadn't been there in a while. Maybe I knew, even before I got there, that I needed proof that not everything had been rewritten. But when I reached it, the ladder was broken. Spray painted across the front panel in sloppy red letters were the words, Tyler was here. The side window had been smashed. Inside were beer cans, cigarette butts, and the stale smell of something ruined on purpose. I climbed up anyway and sat there in the wreckage until the sun started lowering through the trees. That treehouse felt like my childhood looked now. Not just abandoned. Invaded. Mocked. Defaced by people who had never built anything and therefore could not recognize the cruelty of destroying it. My last night at home, no one made a special dinner. There was no goodbye ritual, no apology, no family moment where anyone admitted the enormity of what they were doing. Mom was helping Emma fill out a baby registry online. Dad watched television with the volume too low. Tyler came by and left with half a lasagna in a foil container Mom packed for him. I ordered a pizza with my own money and ate it alone in my room, or what was left of it. My bed had already been taken apart that morning because the crib had arrived early. The mattress leaned against the wall. The screws sat in a plastic sandwich bag on the dresser. I sat cross-legged on the bare floor with a cardboard box beside me and a paper plate in my lap, eating cooling pepperoni pizza in the hollowed-out remains of my own life. From downstairs, I could hear laughter. Emma's voice. Mom's. The occasional low murmur of Dad. I remember looking around at the stripped walls, the outlines where posters had been, the pale rectangles where shelves used to block the sun, and thinking with a kind of cold disbelief. They really are doing this. Not threatening, not reconsidering, not bluffing. Doing it. The next morning, I left for Florida. 14 years old. A duffel bag, 2 boxes, a backpack, and the knowledge that the people who were supposed to protect me had chosen comfort over me so easily it barely disrupted breakfast. I didn't know then that being sent away would save me. At the time, it felt like proof that I had never truly belonged anywhere at all. Florida didn't feel real at first. It felt like I had been dropped into someone else's life mid-scene, expected to pick up lines I hadn't rehearsed. The air was thicker, warmer. It clung to your skin in a way that made everything feel slightly slower, slightly heavier. The sky looked bigger somehow, like it stretched wider than the one I had grown up under. Even the light was different, brighter, harsher, like it exposed things instead of softening them. I arrived at my grandparents' house 2 days before school started. Grandma Eleanor was 68 then, small, soft-faced, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Grandpa Harold was 70, taller than I expected, with hands that looked like they had built everything they ever touched. They met me at the door like I was something they had been waiting for, not tolerating, not rearranging their lives around. Waiting for. That alone felt unfamiliar enough to make my throat tighten. There she is, Grandpa said, like I had just come home from a long trip instead of being sent away from another one. Grandma pulled me into a hug that didn't feel performative. It wasn't too tight, not too brief, not exaggerated, just steady. You must be exhausted, she said. Come inside. No one mentioned Emma. No one mentioned the nursery. No one mentioned sacrifice. They showed me my room, and it was already set up. Clean bed, fresh sheets, a small desk by the window, a lamp, a bookshelf that wasn't empty. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, just looking at it. Grandma noticed. If there's anything you want to change, we can, she said gently. It's yours. It's yours. 3 words. I had to turn away so they wouldn't see my face. Starting high school where, no one is like trying to walk into a conversation that's been happening for years. Everyone already has roles, inside jokes, unspoken alliances. And then there's you. The interruption. The first day, someone asked where I was from. I told them. Why'd you move? They asked. I hesitated. Because how do you explain that you were replaced? That your absence made someone else more comfortable? That your life was boxed up so a crib could take your place? My sister needed my room, I said finally. The guy blinked. What? She's pregnant, I added. He stared at me like I'd just told him gravity had stopped working. That's messed up. I almost cried right there in the cafeteria. Not because it hurt. Because it didn't. Because for the first time, someone heard the story and reacted the way it deserved. Not with justification. Not with soft explanations. Just truth. The first month was brutal. I ate lunch alone most days. Walked the hallways with that hyper-awareness that comes from knowing you don't belong anywhere yet. Came home and did homework in silence. I didn't call my parents. They didn't call me. But something strange started happening inside that quiet. It didn't feel like neglect. It felt like space. Grandma filled it carefully. Not with pressure. Not with forced closeness. Just attention. How was math today? She asked one afternoon while slicing apples at the kitchen counter. Fine. What are you learning? Functions. She nodded like that mattered. Show me one later. Not prove you're doing well. Not you better keep your grades up. Just curiosity. It threw me off at first. Adults weren't supposed to care about the details unless they were looking for something to criticize. But Grandma didn't correct me when I stumbled explaining things. She listened. Actually listened. The first time I broke down, it came out of nowhere. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Pencil in my hand. Notebook open. And then suddenly I couldn't breathe. It hit like a wave. Sharp. Overwhelming. Impossible to push back. I dropped the pencil and just folded, crying hard enough that it felt like something inside me was tearing loose. Grandma didn't panic. She didn't ask questions right away. She just pulled out the chair next to me and sat there, one hand resting lightly on my back, moving in slow circles until my breathing evened out. We stayed like that for a while. Then she said quietly, what they did wasn't right. That was it. No lecture. No minimization. No, but they love you. Just truth. Simple. Clean. Undeniable. You're allowed to be angry, she added. Just don't let it be the only thing you carry. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I don't know how not to. You'll learn, she said. You don't have to do it all at once. Grandpa approached things differently. He didn't talk much about feelings. He taught. His workshop was in the garage. It smelled like wood, metal, oil, and something steady, like time had a texture and it lived in that room. Come here, he said one Saturday, handing me a pair of safety glasses. I hesitated. I don't know how to use any of this. He smiled slightly. Good. That means you won't have to unlearn anything. That was the first time anyone had framed my lack of experience as something positive. He showed me how to measure wood properly, how to cut without forcing the blade, how to sand until the surface felt like something worth touching. At first, my hands were clumsy, measurements off, edges uneven, but he didn't take the tools away, didn't sigh, didn't correct me with that edge of disappointment I was used to. He just said, try again. So I did, over and over, until something clicked. The first thing I built on my own was a small wooden box. Nothing impressive, but the joints held. The lid closed smoothly. It didn't fall apart when I picked it up. Grandpa put it on his mantel like it was something valuable. Made by my granddaughter, he told anyone who came over. I rolled my eyes and pretended to be embarrassed. But something inside me, something small and fragile, stood up a little straighter. Back home, I barely existed. Mom called once a month. The conversations were stiff. How's school? Fine. Then she'd spend 20 minutes showing me Emma's baby on FaceTime. Olivia. Pink blankets, tiny hands, soft noises. My niece. A person I had never met. Dad would appear briefly at the end. Be good for your grandparents, he'd say. Then he'd disappear again. Emma? She didn't call. Not until 3 months later. I saw her name on my phone and felt something flicker. Hope, maybe. Stupid hope. Hey, I answered. Can you ask Grandma and Grandpa to send more money for the christening? She said. No, hello. No, how are you? Just a request. I hung up. My 15th birthday told me everything I needed to know. My parents sent a card. It arrived 3 days late. Inside was a $25 gift card and a printed message. Not handwritten. Not personal. Just generic. Grandma and Grandpa threw me a party. Cake. Candles. Dinner. And then they took me to pick out a laptop. Not cheap. Not symbolic. Real. You'll need it for school, Grandma said. But I knew it was more than that. It was investment. Belief. That laptop changed everything. At first, it was just distraction. Something to fill the empty hours. Then it became curiosity. Then obsession. I started teaching myself how things worked. Basic programming. Fixing small glitches. Taking apart old devices and putting them back together. Grandpa noticed. A few days later, he came home with a box. What's this? I asked. Broken electronics from a yard sale, he said. Figured you might want to take a look. I opened it like it was treasure. Old routers. Damaged laptops. Random wires. Either you fix them, he added, or they were already broken. No loss. It felt like permission. To try. To fail. To learn without punishment. School got easier. Not perfect, but manageable. I joined the computer club. Met people who cared more about code than popularity. Made a friend. Marcus Lee, who lived a few streets over. His parents were divorced. He understood what it felt like to be split between versions of home that didn't quite fit. We didn't talk about it much. We didn't have to. Slowly, something shifted. The pain didn't disappear. It just changed shape. From something sharp and constant into something quieter. Manageable. Like a bruise instead of a wound. I still thought about my family. But less. Weeks would pass without them crossing my mind. And when they did, it didn't feel like missing something. It felt like remembering something I had already survived. The first time I went back was during my junior year. Thanksgiving, Grandma insisted. Family should be together, she said. I didn't argue. Part of me wanted to see. To understand what had happened to the place I used to call home. The moment I walked in, I knew. It wasn't my home anymore. It wasn't even pretending to be. My old room was gone. Replaced. Pink walls. Crib. Stuffed animals. A small dresser filled with things that had never belonged to me. No trace of who I had been. Not even accidentally. Emma was still living there, with Olivia. Tyler drifted in and out like background noise. The weirdest part wasn't the change. It was how normal everyone acted. Like I had just been away at camp. Like nothing significant had happened. Oh, you should see the new mall, Mom said brightly. They renovated it since you lived here. Since I lived here. Like it had been temporary. Optional. Dad tried. He apologized one night when we were alone. I should have handled things differently, he said. I nodded. But it didn't land. Apologies after the damage don't rebuild anything. They just acknowledged the ruins. When I went back to Florida after that visit, something settled inside me. A decision. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. That house wasn't mine anymore. And more importantly, I didn't need it to be. When I graduated high school, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was stepping fully into something I had already started building. My parents flew in for the ceremony. That alone felt strange. 4 years of distance, and suddenly they were there, smiling, taking pictures, acting like they had been part of the journey all along. Mom hugged me too tightly, like she was trying to compress the missing years into a single gesture. "I'm so proud of you," she said. The words landed wrong, not because they were unpleasant, because they were empty. Pride implies presence, investment, witnessing the struggle. She hadn't seen any of it. Dad shook my hand first, then pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. "You did good," he said quietly. That one felt closer to real. At dinner that night, Mom spent most of the time showing Grandma's neighbors pictures of Olivia, now 4 years old, talking about how Emma had been through so much and how strong she was for raising a child under difficult circumstances. Difficult circumstances. Like they hadn't engineered half of them. Like the entire situation hadn't been cushioned for Emma at my expense. Emma herself wasn't even there. She couldn't make it. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. At some point during the meal, between polite conversation and forced nostalgia, I realized something important. They were still living in the same version of reality. One where Emma was the center. One where I was optional. So when the moment came, I didn't hesitate. "I'm not coming back," I said. The table went quiet. Mom blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'm staying here," I said. "I'm getting my own place. I'm starting a business." She frowned, genuinely confused. "But your room?" "It's not my room," I cut in. That was the first time I had interrupted her like that. Ever. "It hasn't been my room for years." Silence settled again. Dad didn't look surprised. He just nodded once, slowly, like he had known this was coming long before anyone said it out loud. Grandpa caught my eye from across the table. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not just pride. Recognition. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Grandpa knocked on my door. "Got a minute?" I sat up. "Yeah." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, then handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "Open it." I did. A check. $5,000. My stomach dropped. "Grandpa, I can't." "You can," he said simply. "Seed money." "For what?" "For whatever you're building." I stared at it. "That's too much." He smiled faintly. "Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with your first month's rent." Despite everything, I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that felt unfamiliar in my own chest. "I believe in you," he added. Those words stayed with me longer than the money ever did. The first 2 years on my own were brutal. I moved into a tiny studio apartment above an Indian restaurant. The smell of spices seeped into everything. My clothes, my sheets, even my hair if I stayed in too long. At first it annoyed me. Then it just became part of the background, like the hum of the old air conditioner that rattled at night. I worked constantly. During the day, I fixed computers. At night, I studied for certifications. On weekends, I cold-called small businesses offering services they didn't yet know they needed. I lived on ramen and cheap coffee. Sleep became negotiable. There were days I questioned everything. Days I wondered if I had made a mistake not going back. Days when exhaustion blurred the edges of my confidence. But there was one thing I had now that I had never had before. Control. No one could send me away. No one could take my space. No one could decide I was expendable. Every dollar I made, every skill I learned, every client I earned, it was mine. At first, my work was small. Fixing personal laptops, removing viruses, recovering lost files. I charged less than the big shops, so word spread. People like saving money. They also like someone who shows up, explains things clearly, and doesn't treat them like an inconvenience. I made house calls with a backpack full of tools, sometimes on a bike because I couldn't afford a car yet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Then came the break. A local accounting firm had a server crash. They were about to pay thousands to a large IT company. I offered to take a look first. They were skeptical. I didn't blame them, but they let me try. It took me one afternoon. The problem wasn't as catastrophic as they thought, just layered failures no one had bothered to trace properly. I fixed it, charged them a fraction of what they had been quoted. The owner was impressed, more than impressed. He offered me a monthly contract. That was the turning point. From there, things started building. Slowly at first, then faster. One client became two became five. Five became a network. By 20, I hired my first employee, a community college student who knew networking better than I did. By 22, I had an office. Small, cramped, but real. By 24, I had a team of 5. An actual company. Not huge, not flashy, but stable, independent, mine. The best part wasn't the money, it was the autonomy. For the first time in my life, no one could rearrange me. No one could decide I was in the way. No one could erase me from a space I had built with my own hands. That kind of security changes how you breathe. Back home, nothing really changed. Emma, now 27, was still living with my parents. Olivia was 10. Tyler drifted in and out of their lives like static. Jobs came and went for Emma. Retail, waitressing, reception work. Nothing stuck. There was always a reason. The manager was unfair. The hours were too long. The customers were difficult. From what I could tell, the real issue was simpler. She didn't want to work, and she didn't have to. My parents were still there, still cushioning every fall, still calling it love. Dad sounded more tired every time we spoke. Mom sounded exactly the same. Emma only reached out when she needed something. That never changed. On my 23rd birthday, I got a text from her. "Happy birthday, bro." No capitalization. No name. An hour later, "Can you loan me 800? Car problems." I stared at the screen for a long time. 10 years of distance. And that was the bridge she built. I didn't respond. She texted again. And again. Each message more guilt-heavy than the last. By the fourth, she was accusing me of abandoning the family. Of not caring about Olivia. That one almost got to me. Almost. But not enough. I replied once. "Ask Tyler or Mom and Dad. They're your support system." She didn't text again. Grandpa passed away when I was 22. Heart attack. Peaceful. That's what everyone said. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt like losing the one person who had quietly anchored my entire life. The funeral was revealing. My parents came. Emma didn't. She couldn't find a sitter, Mom said, which was a lie so obvious it didn't even bother trying to hide. At the service, Mom cried loudly, talked about how close she had been to him, how much he meant to her. People nodded. Sympathetic, respectful. I stood there and said nothing, because I knew, and Grandma knew, and that was enough. After the funeral, I overheard Mom telling one of Grandma's friends how worried they were about me, how they had offered to have me come stay with them for a while. Another lie. It was almost impressive, the way she could rewrite reality so smoothly. Like truth was just another version she could choose not to use. Despite everything, I built something good. A life that made sense. A routine that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. Friends. Work. Stability. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. More importantly, I was free. And then, one random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom," I almost didn't answer. Almost. But something in me, habit maybe, still reacted. "Hello?" Her voice was shaking. "Your sister was in a car accident." I leaned back in my chair. "Is she?" "She's alive," Mom said quickly. "But it's bad. Her leg, it's broken in 3 places. And her hip. The doctors say she won't be able to work for months." I waited, because I knew. There's always a second part. And Tyler, as she continued, voice cracking, he left, for good this time. He moved to California with some woman he met online. Of course he did. "We're struggling," she said. "Medical bills, Olivia, your father's hours got cut, my arthritis." There it was, not said directly, but clear. Then finally, "We were hoping you could come visit, reconnect, meet Olivia properly." Reconnect. I almost laughed. 10 years. It had taken 10 years and a crisis for them to remember I existed in a way that might be useful. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let them deal with the consequences they had spent a decade building. But then I thought about Olivia, 10 years old, innocent, growing up inside the same dysfunction that had shaped me. None of this was her fault. And if I was honest, there was another reason, a quieter one. I wanted them to see me, not the version they remembered. Not the girl they dismissed. The woman I had become without them. So I called back. "I'll come," I said. But I already knew one thing. This time, I wasn't the one being rearranged. I didn't stay at their house. That decision came easily. I booked a hotel 10 minutes away. Something neutral, clean, impersonal. Somewhere I could leave when I needed to. I wasn't about to walk back into that house and pretend I still belonged there. Not anymore. Not like before. Driving through my old neighborhood felt like stepping into a memory that had been slightly rewritten without my permission. The streets looked smaller, the houses closer together. The park where I used to skateboard had new equipment, brighter colors, like someone had tried to modernize something that had already moved on without me. But when I pulled into the driveway, one thing hadn't changed. The feeling, that quiet tightening in my chest, like the house itself remembered who I used to be, and what had been done to her. I sat in the car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the past settle where it needed to before I stepped out. Then I went inside. The door opened before I knocked. Mom. She looked older, not just physically, though the lines around her mouth were deeper, her posture slightly bent, but diminished somehow. Like time had taken something from her that she hadn't realized she needed to protect. Lena, she said, her voice breaking slightly. She stepped forward and hugged me. I let her. But I didn't hug her back the same way. There's a difference between returning an embrace and allowing one. I allowed it. Dad was behind her. He didn't hesitate. He pulled me into a real hug, firm, quiet. "I've missed you," he whispered. That landed. Not enough to undo anything, but enough to feel real. The house smelled the same. Cleaner, maybe, but familiar. And yet, wrong. The walls were covered in photos, mostly Olivia. Different ages, different outfits, school pictures, birthday moments. There were only 2 photos of me. One from my high school graduation, one from when I was maybe 12, both placed in corners. Easy to miss. That told me everything I needed to know. My room, or what used to be my room, was still pink. Still filled with stuffed animals, shelves of toys, books meant for a child who had never been asked to give anything up for anyone else. I stood in the doorway for a second. Then I stepped away. I wasn't here for that. Emma was on the couch. Her leg was in a cast, propped up awkwardly on pillows. Phone in hand, scrolling. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Oh," she said, "you actually came." No warmth, no apology, just mild surprise. 10 years, and that was what I got. Mom hovered. Dad stayed quiet. The same roles, the same structure. Nothing had changed. Then the front door opened again, and everything shifted. "Mom, I'm home." Olivia. She stepped inside, backpack sliding off one shoulder, pausing when she saw me. Her eyes moved quickly. Curious. Alert. Smart. "This is your Aunt Lena," Mom said quickly. "We've told you about her." Had they? I wondered what version. Olivia walked closer, studying me. "You work with computers?" she asked. Straight to the point. I smiled slightly. "Yeah." Her entire face lit up, like someone had flipped a switch. "Like coding and games and hacking stuff?" I laughed. Not illegal hacking, but yeah, some of that. She dropped her backpack and started asking questions faster than I could answer them. Real questions. Curious questions. The kind that come from someone who actually wants to understand something, not just talk about themselves. And just like that, I saw it. The difference. She wasn't Emma. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, after Olivia went to bed, we sat in the living room. Same couch. Same layout. Different power. Mom clasped her hands together. "We're struggling," she said carefully. There it was. No performance this time. Just truth. Emma shifted on the couch, finally paying attention. "The medical bills are insane," she added, "and I can't work like this." Of course not. Dad leaned forward. "We're behind on their mortgage," he said, "and Olivia's school." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish. I already understood. Mom looked at me. "You've done well for yourself," she said. "We were hoping maybe you could help." Hope. Such a gentle word for such a heavy ask. Emma smirked slightly. "Yeah," she said. "Must be nice having all that freedom." There it was. Still the same. Still entitled. Still blind. I looked at all of them. Really looked. At the system they had built. The roles they had locked themselves into. The consequences they were now living inside. And I realized something. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. Hate requires energy. I had spent mine building something better. What I felt now was something quieter. Distance. Clarity. Maybe even a little pity. "I'll help," I said. Mom exhaled sharply, relief flooding her face. Emma straightened, but I raised a hand slightly. On my terms. Silence. I continued. "I'm not giving anyone money directly." Emma's expression tightened immediately. "What?" "I'll pay for Olivia's expenses," I said. "School, medical bills, anything she needs. But I pay it directly, not through you." Mom looked confused. Emma looked offended. "What, you don't trust us?" she snapped. I held her gaze. "No," I said calmly. "I don't." That landed exactly how it should. Dad nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. Emma turned toward him, angry. "Seriously?" He didn't back down this time. "You haven't exactly proven otherwise." That surprised me. Not because he was wrong, because he said it out loud. To her, for once. I continued. "Any money goes through Dad. Not you, not Mom." Mom flinched slightly, but she didn't argue. Not really. Because deep down, she knew. "I also want you," I said, looking at Emma, "to enroll in job training once you're physically able." Her eyes widened. "You don't get to dictate my life." "I don't," I said, "but I do get to decide what my help supports." She stared at me, then laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than us now?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. After the conversation ended, I walked out to my car. Dad followed me. The night air was cooler than I expected. Quiet. I should have stood up for you, he said. No build-up, no excuses. Just that. I know, I said. He looked at me carefully. I regret it, he added, every day. I believed him. That was the strange part. I actually believed him. But belief and forgiveness are not the same thing. I nodded once. I'm not there yet, I said. I understand. We stood there for a moment, two people connected by something broken, trying in different ways to acknowledge it. Take care of Olivia, I said finally. She deserves better than this. He nodded. She does. Driving back to the hotel, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. What I felt was settled, like a chapter that had been left open for too long had finally found its ending. They had needed me, not because they loved me better, not because they had changed, because life had caught up to them. And for the first time, I had the power to decide what that meant. I kept my word. I helped, but only through the boundaries I set. Not a dollar more, not a step beyond. Emma didn't change much. She never really does. Mom still made excuses. Still softened every edge Emma refused to sand down herself. But Dad? He tried. In small ways. Quiet ways. It wasn't enough to fix the past. But it was something. The only relationship that truly grew was with Olivia. We started video calling once a week. Talking about coding. Books. Little things that mattered in her world. She listened. She learned. She asked questions. And sometimes, she reminded me of who I might have been if someone had given me the same space to grow. People ask me sometimes why I didn't just cut them all off. Why I didn't walk away completely. The answer is simple. Because Olivia didn't deserve that. And maybe, neither did I. Not anymore. I didn't move back. I visit sometimes. For Olivia. For Dad. But my life, my real life, is in Florida. Built from scratch. On my terms. If something ever happened to my parents, if Olivia needed a place to go, I wouldn't hesitate. Not for them. For her. Because she deserves a chance at something better. Something stable. Something chosen. And maybe that's the real ending. Not revenge. Not reconciliation. Just this. They built a world where I didn't matter. So I built one where I did. And now, they have to live in theirs. While I live in mine.